Picture this. A Russian general stands before Vladimir Putin and declares victory. The city has been liberated, he says. The enemy has been destroyed. The operation is complete. The date is November 20th, 2025. The general is Valery Gerasimov, chief of the Russian General Staff. The city is Kupyansk, and within weeks, that declaration would become one of the most humiliating moments in the entire history of this war, because Kupyansk was not liberated. It was a trap, and Russia walked directly into it. Fast forward to May 2026. Kupyansk has been cleared of Russian forces. The Ukrainian flag flies over the city center. The last organized Russian resistance point, soldiers hiding in the basement of a hospital building after their supply lines were severed, has been eliminated. And now the thousands of battle-hardened Ukrainian troops who fought for this city are free to move north, free to face the next threat. And that next threat, my friends, is enormous. Because while Russia was bleeding itself dry in Kupyansk, it was quietly assembling a 100,000-strong force along the Belarusian border with a single target in mind: Kyiv. The same route, the same forests, the same strategic logic that failed in 2022. And it is time to break down every layer of this story, from the ambush in the east to the shadow army in the north, and explain exactly why this plan, like everything else Russia has attempted in 2026, is collapsing before it can begin. Make sure you are subscribed to States News right now and have your notifications enabled. This situation is developing in real time, and the stakes could not be higher. Hit that button. Because what comes next in this war may determine not just the fate of Ukraine, but the stability of the entire European security order. Let us start from the beginning. Because to understand why May 2026 is so significant, you have to understand what happened in Kupyansk from the inside, not the propaganda version, the real version. Kupyansk is not just any city. It is a strategic hub, a transport intersection connecting road and rail links between Kharkiv and the Eastern Front. The city sits beside the Oskil River, and controlling it means controlling the logistics arteries feeding Ukrainian positions across the entire Kharkiv region. Russia first captured Kupyansk on the first day of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. Ukraine retook it during the stunning Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022. It became a symbol of Ukrainian resilience. And then, in late 2024, Russia began its slow, grinding push to take it back. Russian forces crossed the Oskil River by boat, establishing a foothold on the right bank approximately 20 kilometers north of the city near the village of Novomlinsk. From there, they steadily picked off surrounding villages, built up forces, and edged toward Kupyansk from multiple directions. As reported by Ukrainska Pravda in February 2026, Ukraine's Kupyansk operation began in late August 2025. Its objective was to regain control of a key transport hub with direct road and rail links to Kharkiv and a road south via Izium towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. The operation was not just defensive, it was a carefully set trap with a strategic purpose that went far beyond the city itself. Here is where it becomes brilliant. The Ukrainian General Staff, under Commander-in-Chief General Oleksandr Syrsky, did not simply reinforce Kupyansk. They created a dedicated combined strike force specifically designed to encircle, isolate, and destroy whatever Russian elements entered the city. The Khartiia Search and Strike Group. It included the 13th Khartiia Brigade, the 475th Code 9.2 Assault Regiment, elements of the 92nd Assault Brigade, the Foreign Legion of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, and the 144th Mechanized Brigade, 5 specialized units, 1 mission: let Russia come in. Then close the door behind them. The operation was planned and led by the National Guard's 2nd Khartiia Corps, together with the Kupyansk Tactical Group, operating under the direct control of General Syrsky and National Guard Commander Oleksandr Pivnenko. And at the heart of this force was the Achilles Battalion, the 429th Unmanned Systems Brigade, a unit that began as a volunteer company in 2022 and by January 2026 had expanded to a full brigade. These drone operators had one task at Kupyansk: let nothing through, and they did exactly that. Russia walked into the city in force. The 6th Combined Arms Army of the Leningrad Military District and the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Moscow Military District were committed to this front. Russia's most modern T-90M tanks, trained contract soldiers, elite units, the 27th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, the 121st and 122nd Regiments of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division. These were not cannon fodder. These were among Moscow's finest. And they walked into a city that had been prepared to destroy them. On November 20th, 2025, Gerasimov reported to Putin that Kupyansk had been captured. As revealed by Ukrainska Pravda, a 27-year-old Ukrainian intelligence officer already knew the claim was false, and newly decorated Hero of Russia, Sergei Kuzovlyov, commander of the West Group of Forces, was forced to push the supposed liberation back to January or February of 2026. International media called it a humiliation for Putin. That is accurate, but it understates what was actually happening, because while Russia was celebrating a victory that did not exist, Ukraine was tightening the noose. Between September 22nd and December 12th of 2025, according to reporting by the New Voice of Ukraine citing Khartiia Corps, Ukrainian forces killed 1,027 Russian soldiers, wounded 291, captured 13, and encircled more than 200 in a single operation. Then the encirclement began in earnest. The Khartiia force broke through to the Oskil River, physically severing Russian supply routes into the city. Russian troops inside Kupyansk were cut off, isolated, with no logistic support, no fresh reinforcements, and no organized retreat route. And still, Gerasimov's public statements denied reality. On January 15, 2026, at a meeting with Western Group commanders, he made exaggerated claims about Kupyansk's liberation status, according to ISW analysis. Those claims were immediately debunked by geolocated FPV drone footage and independent military analysts. Moscow's propaganda operation had officially become a running joke. The gap between what the Kremlin was saying and what anyone with a smartphone could verify had become too wide to paper over. The clearing operation proceeded. Ukrainian forces moved block by block, building by building, the Khartiia method. As Colonel Igor Obolensky, commander of the 2nd Corps of Khartiia, stated in comments reported by the Kyiv Independent, the Kupyansk operation proves that through planning, headquarters training, and high-quality unit preparation, the enemy can be successfully stopped and destroyed. Ukrainian forces cleared residential areas. They sealed pipeline entrances where Russian infantry were attempting to infiltrate through industrial pipes running under the Oskil River. FPV operators with thermal cameras detected Russian soldiers hiding inside pipes and in tree hollows, neutralizing each infiltration attempt before it could establish a foothold. Every entry point closed. The Lava Unmanned Systems Battalion, a specialized drone unit within the Khartiia Corps that began as a battalion in September 2025 and had expanded to a full regiment by April 2026, conducted operations in which no Ukrainian soldiers were physically present on the battlefield at all, purely unmanned. Strike drones with grenade launchers and kamikaze drones carrying explosives were deployed against Russian troops who had fortified themselves inside residential buildings. The results, as reported by the New Voice of Ukraine, were documented with precision. Russian strongholds demolished, personnel eliminated, ammunition depots destroyed, 0 Ukrainian ground casualties in those engagements. The final phase came in May 2026. By this point, the only organized Russian resistance remaining in Kupyansk city center was a group of approximately 20 soldiers who had retreated to the basement of the Kupyansk Central District Hospital. The building had become their last refuge after every supply line was cut. They had fortified the thick concrete walls and underground passages. They had turned a hospital into a small fortress. And Ukraine, operating under the principle of minimizing civilian infrastructure damage, first deployed reconnaissance drones for precise target identification. Then Ukrainian joint forces struck with guided munitions and coordinated heavy drone attacks on the structure. The final Russian resistance point inside the hospital was eliminated. No organized Russian military structure remained capable of holding in the Kupyansk city center. According to ISW's assessment and the Euromaidan press reporting of May 20th, 2026, Ukraine had recaptured much of Kupyansk and taken several surrounding settlements in western Zaporizhia Oblast since late April 2026. The ISW described these advances as the largest Ukrainian territorial gains since Kyiv's Kursk incursion in August 2024. In a May 15th interview with the Ukrainian defense outlet Militarny, General Syrskyi himself confirmed that the count of Ukrainian offensive actions had exceeded Russian ones as of May 14th, citing precise strikes, the destruction of Russian reserves, and constant pressure on assault units. But there is more to this story, and this is where the Kupyansk operation reveals its true strategic dimensions, because what Russia lost at Kupyansk was not just a city, it was the reserves it needed for everything else. Before we go deeper into those implications, make sure you are subscribed to States News. Leave a comment below telling us what you think Russia's real strategic calculations are right now. Do you believe the northern threat is genuine, or is it a pressure operation designed to force Ukraine to stretch its lines? The debate is real and your perspective matters. Subscribe and join the conversation. Now, back to what Russia actually lost in Kupyansk and why it matters far beyond the Kharkiv region, the 6th Combined Arms Army and the 1st Guards Tank Army. These were not peripheral units. The Kremlin had committed some of its most experienced, best-equipped formations to the Kupyansk axis. The 153rd Tank Regiment of the 47th Tank Division, described in Russian military structures as among Moscow's most powerful armored forces, lost the majority of its armored vehicles to Ukrainian FPV drone attacks during the Kupyansk operation. The 27th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade suffered its heaviest losses of the war against Ukraine's tactical moves at Kupyansk. The 121st and 122nd Regiments of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division had their logistics cut at the Oskol River bridgeheads and were neutralized entirely. These losses were not just numbers. They were the specific formations Moscow had earmarked as part of its strategic reserve for the northern offensive. Here is the calculation that makes Kremlin planners sweat. Russia planned a 100,000-strong northern force to advance on Kyiv through the Chernihiv forests. That force was supposed to be drawn partly from Eastern reserves, including units that had participated in recent successes or were fresh enough to execute a blitzkrieg-style thrust. Kupyansk destroyed that logic entirely. The Eastern reserves that were supposed to be available for the northern operation spent months being ground up in a city that Russia now does not control. The manpower consumed, the armored vehicles destroyed, the experienced contract soldiers eliminated, all gone. And they cannot be replaced in time for a spring or summer offensive on Kyiv. Ukrainian drone strikes alone demonstrate the scale of the attrition. According to data from Ukraine's Delta Battlefield Management System cited by Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Major Robert Brovdy, call sign Magyar, on May 20th, Ukrainian drones struck 19,203 Russian personnel in just the first 19 days of May 2026. Forces under Magyar's direct command accounted for more than 6,000 of those losses. That is not an abstraction. That is the equivalent of an entire division's worth of soldiers eliminated by drones in less than 3 weeks, from a force that is already struggling to replace its monthly casualties. And now, the Northern Front. On May 20th, 2026, President Zelensky delivered his evening address following a critical intelligence meeting that included the heads of the General Staff, the Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate, the Foreign Intelligence Service, and the Security Service of Ukraine. The content of what he disclosed was remarkable in its specificity. As reported by the Kyiv Independent, CBC News, and Euronews, Zelensky stated that Ukrainian intelligence had confirmed Russia was developing 5 distinct scenarios for offensive operations in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction. Not one plan. 5. Each representing a different approach, a different axis, a different combination of forces. The intelligence assessment was, in his words, extremely realistic. And General Syrskyi, speaking to Militarny on May 15th, was direct. There is a trend toward an expansion of the front line, he said. The threat from Belarus and possible operations in the north is real. The Russian General Staff is actively planning offensive operations from the north. The mechanism is Belarus, and this is not a new threat. It is the same threat that haunted Ukraine from the first hours of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, when Russian troops used Belarusian territory to drive south toward Kyiv through exactly the same Chernihiv forests that are now being discussed again. Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, those places carry those names in history precisely because Russian forces use Belarus as a launch pad, and now Minsk is being prepared for round 2. On May 4th, State Border Guard Service spokesperson Andriy Demchenko confirmed, as reported by the Kyiv Independent, that Belarus was actively developing logistics routes, training grounds, and military infrastructure in coordination with Russia along Ukraine's northern border. The infrastructure was described as capable of being activated by Russia at any time. On April 17th, Zelensky had already reported that new roads and artillery positions were being constructed in Belarus. And on May 18th, Belarus and Russia launched joint military exercises explicitly incorporating the use of nuclear weapons. Belarus's defense ministry stated the exercises were intended to improve the readiness of the armed forces to use modern means of destruction, including special ammunition. Russia's defense ministry reported that more than 64,000 troops and 7,800 units of equipment were involved, including strategic missile forces, the Pacific Fleet, and the Northern Fleet. Let us be clear about what a nuclear exercise of this scale, timed to coincide with intelligence assessments of a northern offensive, is designed to communicate. It is not primarily a military preparatory action. It is a psychological pressure operation, a reminder to Kyiv and to NATO capitals that escalation carries nuclear dimensions, a message designed to paralyze decision-making and slow down Western support. Zelensky's response to this pressure was blunt. In his May 20th address, as quoted by Euronews, he said it was already quite annoying that Ukraine constantly faces this kind of threat, that at some point the Russians may drag Belarus into an expansion of the war. They must understand he added, consequences for them will follow and will be significant. But Ukraine's response to the northern threat is not only diplomatic, it is structural. And this is where the Kupyansk victory reveals its second strategic dimension. The complete clearing of Kupyansk freed thousands of experienced Ukrainian soldiers. These were not freshly trained conscripts. These were elite troops who had spent months executing one of the most complex urban warfare operations of the entire conflict. The 13th Khartiia Brigade, the 475th Assault Regiment, units of the 92nd Assault Brigade, the Foreign Legion intelligence operators, the 144th Mechanized Brigade, all of them now freed from the eastern fight, available to rotate northward. With those units added to the Chernihiv region's defensive structure, Ukrainian military strength on the northern border could reach an estimated 50,000 to 55,000 troops, according to assessments cited in the transcript analysis of the situation. But the human dimension is only part of it. Ukraine built its northern defensive line after 2022 with specific lessons from the catastrophic early days of the full-scale invasion burned into every design decision. What emerged is not just a reinforced border. It is a layered fortress. More than 2,130 team-level concrete bunkers connected by underground tunnels stretching across a 300-kilometer fortification line from the Kyiv reservoir to Sumy. Each bunker reinforced with special steel structures capable of withstanding prolonged artillery bombardment. More than 3,000 kilometers of anti-tank ditches running along the borderline. Behind those ditches, thousands of concrete dragon's teeth pyramids designed to halt and channel armored vehicles into kill zones. Concrete pillboxes, largely buried for protection against Russian artillery. Hidden underground ammunition depots positioned between trench lines, and advanced electronic warfare systems deployed up to 100 kilometers deep from the border, designed to blunt Russian air reconnaissance and drone operations right at the point of entry. The military mathematics of this are not subtle. Successfully breaching a layered defensive system of this depth and reinforcement typically requires the attacking force to have 3 to 5 times numerical superiority and extremely robust logistical support. Russia's planned 100,000 troops against a fortified defense of 50,000 to 55,000 experienced Ukrainian soldiers supported by drone networks, electronic warfare, and a physical barrier system designed specifically to absorb and destroy armored advances does not produce 3-to-1 superiority. It produces rough numerical parity at best, with all the disadvantages falling on the attacker. And there is a critical question hanging over every element of Russia's northern planning. Where are the elite forces? The 1st Guards Tank Army, gone at Kupyansk. The 6th Combined Arms Army, depleted. The reserves that were supposed to give the northern force its armored spearhead have been consumed in a city that Russia does not hold. What remains is a 100,000-strong mobilization that is, by all available assessments of Russian training timelines, composed heavily of troops who received 1 week of preparation before deployment. Soldiers who, as demonstrated at Odradny on May 15th, when the Shval rugby formula shattered a 6-month Russian fortification in hours, do not know basic maneuvers, do not trust their commanders, and whose default response to coordinated Ukrainian tactical pressure has been documented in ISW's language as those who could escape fled. Let us step back and look at the complete picture. Because what is happening in May 2026 is not a collection of isolated battlefield events. It is a single interconnected strategic story. Russia entered 2026 with 3 objectives: hold and expand gains in Donetsk, capture Kupyansk and Kharkiv to secure the Eastern Front and free up reserves, then pivot those reserves north for a decisive strike on Kyiv through the Chernihiv corridor. All 3 objectives have failed. In Donetsk, Russia has been losing net territory, with ISW data showing a net loss of 45 square miles in the 4 weeks between April 14th and May 12th alone. In Kupyansk, the reserves that were supposed to be available for the northern operation spent months being destroyed in an urban encirclement that Ukraine designed specifically to consume them. And in the north, the 100,000-strong force that was supposed to achieve strategic surprise through the Chernihiv forests now faces a reinforced Ukrainian defensive system staffed by the very troops who defeated those reserves in the east. The casualty arithmetic that underlies all of this continues to compound. As reported by United 24 Media, in the first quarter of 2026, Russia mobilized approximately 80,000 troops while losing more than 90,000. In March 2026 alone, according to figures presented by Zelensky and reported by United 24 Media, Russia lost 35,351 soldiers killed or wounded, setting a new monthly record. In April 2026, according to United 24 Media, Russia advanced just 53 square kilometers in Donetsk while losing 25,000 troops on that axis, a cost of 470 soldiers per square kilometer captured. The cumulative casualty total, cited by multiple Western intelligence assessments and compiled by Russia Matters, stands between 1.1 million and 1.35 million Russian soldiers killed and wounded since February 2022. Former CIA Director William Burns put the total at 1.1 million in his January 2026 interview with the Financial Times. CSIS estimated 1.2 million. The Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service estimated 1 million. Bloomberg, citing unnamed Western officials, reported 1.2 million. Ukraine's own general staff, as of May 2026, places the total above 1.35 million. Every one of these figures tells the same story. Russia has lost more soldiers in 4 years of this war than many countries have in their entire military histories. And it is still losing more per month than it can replace. Gerasimov's claims about Kupyansk were not just a propaganda failure. They represent something deeper. When a chief of the general staff reports a victory to his commander-in-chief, that field footage immediately contradicts. And when that commander-in-chief accepts the false report, it points to a systemic breakdown in institutional honesty. The same phenomenon documented at Verdun, where German commanders continued to report progress long after the offensive had ceased to be viable, because the political cost of telling the truth was too high. Putin received reports of Kupyansk's liberation twice. Putin celebrated, and Ukraine was clearing the city building by building, using thermal-equipped FPV drones to find soldiers hiding in industrial pipes. Now, the question that matters most: can Russia actually execute the northern offensive? And what happens if it tries? Zelensky said Ukraine is preparing responses to each possible Russian course of action. Forces in the northern direction will be increased. He said he has instructed the foreign ministry to prepare additional diplomatic measures targeting Belarus to raise the cost of Minsk's participation. Ukraine will expand long-range drone strikes to increase pressure on Russia and deter further escalation. The Kyiv Post reported that Zelensky stated Ukraine hit an oil refinery in Russia's Yaroslavl region, roughly 700 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled territory, in a signal that no part of Russian territory is beyond reach if escalation continues. The northern fortification line is not static. It is being reinforced in real time with the battle-tested units freed from Kupyansk. The drone networks are expanding. As Brigadier General Pavlo Palisa, deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, stated in April 2026, Ukrainian forces are now using 30% more frontline strike drones than Russia. And George Barros of the Institute for the Study of War, speaking in May 2026, said that Ukraine's priority must be expanding its strike zone to 45 to 50 kilometers depth to deny Russian forces their main infiltration method. That doctrine, which shattered Russian positions at Kupyansk and at Odradny, is now being deployed in depth along the Chernihiv border. What Russia faces if it commits to a northern offensive is not the situation of March 2022, when Ukrainian forces were scrambling to organize a response to a surprise attack from a direction they had not fully prepared for. It is a reinforced, ready, and informed defense staffed by experienced soldiers, layered with physical barriers, saturated with drone operators who have been doing this for months, and backed by an intelligence apparatus that has already enumerated 5 specific Russian scenarios and is preparing countermeasures for each. Russia has not lost this war. That must be said clearly. More than 700,000 Russian soldiers remain on active fronts. Russian industrial capacity continues to produce ammunition and drone components despite sanctions pressure. Glide bomb capacity remains massive. The nuclear exercises in Belarus are not just theater. The political and diplomatic threat from Lukashenko's territory is real. A country of more than 140 million people has not exhausted its mobilization pool. All of this is true, but what is also true is this. Russia entered 2026 with a plan to win. That plan required capturing Kupyansk, consuming those reserves. It required breaking the Donetsk fortress belt, which ISW says cannot fall before late 2027 at the earliest. It required a decisive northern strike that would place Kyiv under existential pressure and force Ukraine to the table. The plan is failing across all 3 dimensions simultaneously. And Ukraine, rather than merely surviving, is completing complex, multi-phase offensive operations, liberating cities, freeing elite units for redeployment, building defensive barriers along every threatened axis, and demonstrating a tactical sophistication in the Khartiia method, in the FPV saturation doctrine, in the drone artillery infantry coordination formula that is systematically degrading Russian offensive capacity faster than Moscow can regenerate it. May 2026 will be studied in military academies, not because of one battle, one operation, or one dramatic moment, but because of what the sum of its events reveals. Gerasimov declared Kupyansk liberated while Ukraine was clearing it house by house. The Red Square Parade was stripped of its tanks and missiles. Ukraine advanced on 3 fronts in a single day. Russian soldiers trained for 1 week ran from 6-month fortifications, and now 100,000 Russian troops wait along the Belarusian border to march through Chernihiv toward a capital that Ukraine is reinforcing with the very soldiers who just destroyed the army those troops were supposed to work alongside. Putin's greatest gamble is not the northern offensive. It is the belief that the logic of force can still produce the outcome that the logic of politics and economics and demographics all say is no longer achievable. That somewhere in some combination of troops and pressure and threats, there is still a path to the Kyiv he marched toward in February 2022. The gates of the north, as the Kupyansk operation has demonstrated, are now guarded by the people who locked them. And Russia's blitzkrieg has turned once again into a slow war of attrition that it is losing by every measurement that matters. We will keep you updated here on States News as this situation develops. The northern threat is real. The Chernihiv border is active. Belarus continues to position itself on the edge of this war, and the next few weeks could determine whether Russia commits to a second strike on Kyiv or whether the losses at Kupyansk have already made that decision for them. Subscribe to States News, enable your notifications, leave a comment with your analysis, and thank you for watching.